The afternoon Cordelia saw that little boy outside the Piggly Wiggly, the groceries fell right out of her hands. She had been loading bags into the trunk when she heard a child laugh, a bright, crackling sound that stopped her cold. She turned. A woman was lifting a small boy out of a shopping cart, and the child's face caught the Georgia sun just right, and Cordelia's stomach dropped to the pavement. He had Damien's forehead. Damien's exact forehead. The same wide-set eyes, the same two small dimples at the corners of his mouth when he smiled. He looked exactly like the photo Cordelia kept on her bedside table, the one of Damien at 3 years old in his Easter suit. She started walking toward them before she even knew what she was doing. "Excuse me," she said. "Excuse me, that little boy." The woman turned. It was Althea, Felicia's mother, the same Althea that Cordelia had looked down on for years. Althea's face went from open to stone in under a second. "You don't have anything to say that I want to hear." Althea picked up the boy, settled him on her hip, and started walking toward her car. "Is he Damien's?" Cordelia called after her. Her voice cracked. "Is that boy my grandson?" Althea didn't turn around. She just said, clear and flat, "You should have thought about that 3 years ago, before you threw my daughter out on the street while she was carrying him." 3 years earlier, the kitchen in the house on Mallow Creek Road smelled like sweet potato pie every Sunday, and that was enough to make Felicia feel like the world wasn't so bad. She and her mother, Althea, had lived in that house since Felicia was 9 years old. It wasn't much. 2 bedrooms, a sitting porch that leaned slightly to the left, a garden Althea tended like it was sacred ground. Althea did alterations and hemming for people in town out of the back bedroom, and Felicia worked full-time at Stitch Perfect, a small alterations shop on the main drag of Decatur, Georgia. Between the two of them, they kept the lights on and the refrigerator stocked. Most Sundays, Althea made pie. People in Decatur had talked about Althea for as long as Felicia could remember. Felicia's father had left when she was 4, packed a bag and drove west and never came back. Althea had never said a cruel word about him, not once. She raised Felicia by herself, worked 2 jobs through most of Felicia's childhood, made sure she finished school, and had something clean to wear. But the town remembered. The town always remembered a woman who'd been left, who'd kept the child anyway, who'd never quite fit the picture people had in their heads of what a respectable woman looked like. Felicia had grown up hearing the edges of it, the way conversations shifted when Althea walked into a room, the way certain women smiled with their mouths and not their eyes. She had decided early that other people's opinions were going to have to make do without her attention. She had her mother, she had her work, and eventually, she had Damien. They'd met at the hardware store, of all places. Felicia had gone in for a specific kind of curtain rod and couldn't find it, and Damien worked weekends there, while managing the books for his family's small trucking operation. He found her the right curtain rod in under 4 minutes, and then asked if she wanted to get coffee. She said yes before she finished thinking about it. They dated quietly for almost 2 years. Damien's family had money by local standards. The trucking company had been his late father's, and his mother Cordelia ran it now with her son as operations manager. Damien was careful about keeping their relationship low-key, and Felicia understood, even when it pricked at her. She knew what Cordelia was. She'd seen women like that before. Women who'd scratched and built and decided the thing they'd built was too good to let just anyone near. Damien proposed on her birthday with a small diamond ring he'd saved for over 6 months. He cried a little when she said yes, which made her love him more than she'd expected to love anyone. Then he took her to meet Cordelia. Cordelia lived in a well-kept brick house at the edge of town, azaleas along the front walk, a flag on the porch. She opened the door and looked Felicia up and down in about 3 seconds, and Felicia knew exactly what she was seeing. Althea's daughter, the fatherless girl from Mallow Creek Road. "So this is who you've been keeping secrets about," Cordelia said, not unkindly enough. The visit lasted an hour. Cordelia offered sweet tea and asked questions that sounded polite on the surface but weren't underneath. Questions about Felicia's job, her education, her mother. When Felicia mentioned Althea's alteration work, Cordelia tilted her head and said, "Isn't that something?" Like it was a curiosity. Like Althea was a curiosity. Damien kept reaching for Felicia's hand under the table. That night after Felicia got home, Althea was waiting up. She looked at her daughter's face and said, "That bad?" "She'll come around," Felicia said, because she believed it. She was young enough to still believe that sincerity was enough to change minds. Cordelia didn't come around. She agreed to the marriage because Damien gave her no other option, told her plainly that if she wanted him in her life, she would accept Felicia. Cordelia had raised her son alone since he was 7. She was not a woman who could stand the thought of losing him, so she bent, publicly, and let the wedding happen. It was a small wedding. Cordelia kept the guest list short and the budget shorter. Althea sat in the front row in a green dress she'd made herself, and Felicia thought her mother had never looked more dignified. Moving into Cordelia's house was Damien's idea. He said it made sense. The house was big, they could save money. It was only temporary until they found their own place. Felicia agreed because she loved him and because she wanted to believe in the temporary part. Cordelia had a talent for making the air in a room feel smaller than it was. She criticized the way Felicia folded towels, the way she seasoned food, the hours she kept. When Damien traveled for work, and he traveled often, managing pickups and deliveries across the state, Cordelia turned up the volume on all of it. Once, when Felicia came home from a long shift and went straight to lie down, Cordelia knocked on her bedroom door 20 minutes later to ask why the breakfast dishes were still in the drying rack. "You don't come from much," Cordelia told her one evening when they were alone in the kitchen. "So maybe nobody taught you how things are supposed to be done." Felicia turned from the stove. "I come from Althea, and Althea taught me everything I need." Cordelia pressed her lips together and left the room. A few weeks after that, Chandra arrived. Chandra had grown up 2 streets over from Damien. They dated in their early 20s before she left Decatur for nursing school in Atlanta. She came back with good credentials, a lease on a townhouse across town, and a way of moving through Cordelia's kitchen like she'd never left, opening the refrigerator, tasting things off the stove, laughing at jokes Felicia wasn't part of. Cordelia lit up around Chandra in a way she had never once lit up around Felicia. "She's like a daughter to me," Cordelia said, as if that were a neutral statement. Damien was polite to Chandra, distant even. That should have made Felicia feel better than it did. But something about the way Cordelia watched the 3 of them, measuring, calculating, kept a quiet unease in Felicia's chest that she couldn't fully explain. Around this same time, a man named Elijah moved into the carriage house at the back of Cordelia's property. He was a pediatrician at the county medical center, recently relocated from Memphis, looking for something quiet while he got his bearings in a new city. He was even-tempered and kept to himself, and the only time he and Felicia talked was when he held the back gate open for her, or when she brought over the occasional covered dish because Althea had sent too much food and it felt wrong to waste it. Cordelia, for reasons Felicia didn't fully understand at the time, didn't like this. She watched their brief, polite exchanges with an expression Felicia couldn't quite read. One evening in October, Felicia's head went light while she was threading an industrial needle at Stitch Perfect. The room tilted. She caught the edge of the work table, and then she was on the floor, and her coworker was already calling for help. She woke up in an exam room at the county medical center. The doctor who walked in was Elijah. He looked as surprised as she was. He checked her vitals, ran through a few questions, and then said, carefully, "Felicia, I think you should know. You're about 8 weeks pregnant. Have you had any symptoms?" She hadn't. She'd put the fatigue down to long hours and the constant low-grade stress of living in Cordelia's house. She sat with the news for a moment and felt something warm and cautious bloom in her chest. He wrote up a prescription for prenatal supplements and sent her home in a cab. She didn't want to alarm anyone by calling Damien from the hospital room. That night, Felicia held the ultrasound printout in her lap on the back porch and thought about how she was going to tell Damien. She wanted it to be something good. She'd wrap up a small pair of shoes, leave them on his pillow. She smiled, thinking about his face. She never got to find out what his face would have looked like. 3 days later, Damien came home in the middle of the afternoon when Felicia was supposed to be at work. She had taken a half day because her back was aching. She was asleep on the couch when she heard the front door open, and she sat up, groggy, and said his name. He was standing in the doorway holding his phone. His face was something she had never seen before, rigid and white and very still. "What is this?" he said. She reached for her glasses and looked. It was a screenshot of a text conversation. Her number at the top, Elijah's number underneath. The messages were, she squinted, flirtatious, intimate, words she had never written to anyone. "I didn't send those," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Your number." His number. Damien's voice was shaking. "My mother has been telling me for weeks she was worried about you and him. I told her she was reading things wrong. I defended you." Felicia stood up. "Damien, those messages are not real. I don't have his personal number saved anywhere. I barely know the man. Stop. He put up one hand, his jaw was tight. Just stop talking. I'm pregnant, she said. I found out 3 days ago I was going to surprise you tonight. The baby is yours. Damien, please look at me. She saw his face change, saw something close off inside him like a light being cut. And then Cordelia appeared in the hallway behind him, and Felicia understood. Cordelia had been there the whole time. She'd sent Felicia a text from her own phone asking her to come home early. This moment had been arranged like furniture. You expect us to believe that? Cordelia said. She wasn't even pretending anymore. Her voice was controlled, almost satisfied. After what we've seen between you and the man living 20 feet from your bedroom window. Felicia looked at her mother-in-law. You did this. What I know, Cordelia said, is what I've seen with my own eyes. Damien hit her once across the face. It was so sudden that she didn't fall, just stumbled back into the edge of the couch. Her hand went to her cheek. She looked at him and didn't recognize a single thing in his expression. Get your things, he said. Get out of my mother's house today. She called Althea from the driveway, sitting on her suitcase, her hands shaking so hard she could barely dial. Althea was there in 20 minutes. She didn't say a word when she saw Felicia's face. She just opened the passenger door. I'm here, she said. Come on, baby, come on home. The town talked, the way small towns always do. Felicia heard it at the grocery store, through neighbors, filtered back to her, through people who thought they were being kind by passing it along. That Felicia had been running around on her husband, that she'd tried to trap Damien with a pregnancy when he caught her. That what could you expect, really, given who her mother was? Felicia walked through all of it with her chin level. She had learned how to do that early. You kept moving and you didn't give them the satisfaction of your face. Althea was sick with worry in a way she tried to hide. Her blood pressure had been elevated for months, and none of this was helping. Felicia took over the cooking and the grocery runs, and the small repairs around the house. At night she lay awake, with her hand pressed flat against her stomach, talking to the baby in the quiet way. Althea had once talked to her when she was little and scared. Elijah came by once, 2 weeks after everything fell apart. He stood on the porch and told Felicia he'd gone to Damien himself, sat across from the man and walked him through everything. He had no personal relationship with Felicia. He'd never received any flirtatious messages from her number. He showed Damien his own phone. Nothing. The texts existed only in a screenshot, which meant someone had sent them from Felicia's phone and deleted them before she woke up. Did he believe you? Felicia asked. Elijah looked at his hands. I don't know. He listened. He didn't throw me out. A pause. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. You didn't do anything wrong, Felicia said. Neither did you. It was the plainest thing anyone outside of Althea had said to her in weeks, and it nearly undid her. She held herself together until he walked back down the porch steps, and then she went inside and cried into the dish towel for a long time. The divorce papers came in November. A note in Cordelia's handwriting had been tucked inside with them. No greeting, just 4 words, don't try for anything. Felicia signed the papers, returned them, and didn't take a single thing from that brick house that hadn't been hers before she walked into it. Althea, watching from the kitchen doorway, said, You're going to be all right. I know, Felicia said. She meant it even if she didn't entirely feel it yet. Her son was born in February, during a cold snap that frosted the grass on Mallow Creek Road and made the porch creak at night. They named him Micah, 7 pounds, 3 ounces, and he had, and this was something Felicia sat with in a long, quiet moment, his father's forehead, his father's exact forehead. Althea held him and cried without making a sound, which was the only time in Felicia's life she had ever seen her mother cry. There you are, Althea said to him. We've been waiting for you. Elijah had moved out of the carriage house the same week Felicia had left. He'd relocated to a rental on the next street over, something he mentioned months later almost as an aside, like it hadn't been a deliberate choice. He stopped by to see Micah a week after they came home from the hospital, carrying formula and a small stuffed rabbit, and Althea immediately put him to work, holding the baby while she finished making dinner. You've got a good grip, Althea told him. He's not going to break. Elijah laughed. He looked completely at ease sitting there with Micah against his chest, and that was not something Felicia had expected. He kept coming by, sometimes with formula or diapers, sometimes just to sit on the porch while Micah slept and talk with Felicia and Althea about ordinary things, his work, his patients, what Althea was planting in the garden. Felicia felt herself relaxing in increments. The way you do when something turns out to be safe, after you'd assumed everything was dangerous. Months passed. Micah grew. Felicia went back to Stitch Perfect part-time, then built up enough of her own clients that she eventually rented a small studio and worked for herself. She was good at it, better than good. She had Althea's eye and her own stubbornness, and those two things together turned out to be sufficient. Meanwhile, across town, things in Cordelia's house were going exactly the way they were always going to go. Chandra had moved in with Damien 6 months after the divorce. Cordelia welcomed her with open arms and a celebration that the neighbors discussed for weeks. People who had whispered about Felicia now congratulated Cordelia on her son finding someone appropriate at last. What they didn't know, what Cordelia didn't know, because Chandra was very careful, was the debt. Chandra liked nice things more than she liked being honest about how she paid for them. She'd spent years staying just ahead of consequences, shuffling balances, borrowing from people she'd charmed, disappearing before the accounting came due. Once she moved in with Damien, she shifted some of the weight onto his accounts. When he didn't notice fast enough, she got bolder. The investment pitch came from a man she'd met at a conference in Atlanta, a real estate development fund with guaranteed returns, documentation that looked convincing enough if you didn't read the fine print carefully. Chandra brought it to Cordelia as a gift. "I know you've always wanted to grow your assets. Let me help you, Mom." Cordelia, who trusted Chandra in a way she had never trusted Felicia, signed the agreement without having her lawyer look it over. 8 months later, the guaranteed returns stopped. The man in Atlanta stopped returning calls. Cordelia's accountant laid out numbers that made the room tilt. It unraveled from there. The debt Chandra had accumulated in Damien's name. The accounts she'd quietly emptied. The explanations that changed every time Damien asked a follow-up question. He changed the account passwords on a Thursday. Chandra was gone by Friday morning, leaving behind a closet of clothes on a card in his name and a handwritten list of people she apparently owed money to, which turned out to be longer than the closet. Some of those people showed up at the house. Then more came. Cordelia sold the property before the year was out. The brick house with the azaleas, the carriage house out back, the land her late husband had worked to buy. She and Damien moved into a rental on the east side of town. What Cordelia didn't know was that Chandra had told Damien the truth before she left. Maybe to wound him on the way out. Maybe because she'd finally run out of energy to keep lying. She sat across from him with her jacket already on and said, the messages were fabricated. She'd taken Felicia's phone one afternoon while Felicia slept on the couch, sent herself a series of texts from Felicia's number to a prepaid number she'd set up, deleted them from Felicia's sent folder, screenshotted them before clearing the other end. The whole thing took about 12 minutes. "Your mother asked me to do something about Felicia," Chandra said. "I did it." Damien sat with that information for a very long time. He understood, slowly, what it meant. It meant Felicia had told the truth from the first moment. It meant the baby she'd told him about was his. It meant every word she had said to him across that living room while he stood there cold and certain. Every word had been true, and he had hit her anyway. And put her out on the street in October while she was pregnant with his child and signed the papers without ever once calling her to say he was sorry. He understood all of it, and understanding it didn't change any of it. 3 years after that afternoon in Cordelia's living room, Cordelia saw Micah at the Piggly Wiggly. The groceries fell out of her hands. She started walking. She called out to Althea. Althea said what she said, clear, flat, and final, and then she put Micah in the car and drove away. 2 weeks later, Cordelia found herself parked near the preschool on Ridgeline Avenue. She knew Felicia lived in that neighborhood. Decatur was still a small town. She walked in and found the right classroom and told the teacher at the door that she was Micah's grandmother and she was there to pick him up early. The teacher's face was carefully neutral. "I'll need to reach his mother first. Please wait here." Felicia got there in 11 minutes. She came through the classroom door with her keys still in her hand, found Cordelia standing near the cubbies with a look on her face that might have been rehearsed. And she positioned herself between that woman and her son, the way a closed door stands between a house and bad weather. "I know you think you have a right to him," Felicia said. Her voice was very quiet. "You don't. You told Damien that baby wasn't his. You threw me out when I was 4 months pregnant. You stood there while your son put his hands on me, and you said nothing. You do not get to call yourself that child's grandmother now, just because he has the right face." Cordelia's mouth opened. "He's Damien's blood." "He's my son," Felicia said at once. If I see you at this school again, I will call the police. The teacher already has your description. We're finished here." She turned, held out her hand, and Micah took it without being asked. They walked out into the parking lot together, and the door closed behind them, and that was the end of it. Micah looked up at her on the sidewalk. "Mama, who was that old lady?" "Nobody we need to worry about," Felicia said. She buckled him into his car seat and kissed the top of his head, which still smelled like the orange-scented shampoo she'd been using on him since he was a baby. "How was your day, baby?" "We made butterflies," he said, with the gravity of someone delivering important news. "Show me when we get home." At home, Elijah's car was already in the driveway. He'd had a key for 6 months now, since he'd asked Felicia in the careful, patient way he did everything, leaving her full space to say no, making it clear there was no timeline she needed to meet. She hadn't made him wait as long as either of them expected. Althea was on the porch, a glass of sweet tea on the rail beside her. She looked at Felicia's face when they came up the walk and said, "She showed up?" "At the school." Althea watched Micah run up the steps and through the front door, already calling for Elijah. She took a slow sip of her tea. She's going to have to live with what she did. That's not nothing. Felicia sat down on the porch step and leaned her head back against the railing. The afternoon was warm and still, the way Georgia afternoons got in late spring, heavy with cut grass and honeysuckle from somewhere down the street. Inside, she could hear Micah's small voice climbing up and up, telling Elijah about the butterflies. "I know," she said. "You did right," Althea said. "You always did right. Some people can't see a thing like that until it's too late for it to matter to you anymore." Felicia closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about who she had been 3 years ago. The woman who had believed that being sincere was enough, that love alone could soften certain kinds of stone. She didn't regret loving Damien. She regretted how long it had taken her to stop trying to be sufficient for people who had already decided she wasn't. The screen door opened, and Elijah came out with Micah on his hip, the boy clutching a crayon butterfly he'd apparently completed at school and needed the world to see immediately. "Look," Micah said, holding it out to Felicia. She took it from him, orange and yellow, slightly lopsided, exactly perfect. "It's beautiful," she said. Micah squirmed to get down and ran to show Althea. Elijah sat on the step beside Felicia. He didn't ask about Cordelia. He could read her face well enough to know something had happened, and he knew her well enough to wait. He just sat there, close enough that their shoulders touched, and looked out at the quiet street. Cordelia would spend the rest of her life knowing exactly what she'd thrown away. Knowing there was a little boy 2 streets over who was growing up whole and loved and completely fine without her. Damien would carry the truth Chandra had handed him like a stone in his pocket. Something he couldn't put down and couldn't use for anything. He had learned too late. He had understood too late. And the world had kept moving without him. Down on the porch step, Micah was holding out his butterfly to Althea with the full seriousness of a person presenting evidence. Althea was making the appropriate face, the one grandmothers make when something small is shown to them and they understand completely that it is the most important thing in the room. Felicia watched them and felt something settle in her chest, quiet, solid, real. She had her mother, she had her son, she had her work and her studio, and the porch that leaned slightly to the left the same way it always had. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything she had needed all along, and it had been waiting for her the whole time.